Now, President Trump recently announced his new plan to cut immigration in half. Not illegal immigration. They're not talking about illegal immigration. No, they're talking about legal immigration. So they're going after legal immigrants now. So yesterday, after Trump made his announcement, there was a briefing at the White House. Now, it wasn't with Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but actually with Stephen Miller, who's an architect of a lot of the Trump administration's anti-immigrant policies. Now, this press conference, a lot of people are focusing on how it got a little bit out of control, where you had Jim Acosta versus Stephen Miller, but there were other parts of it as well, where he was talking to Glenn Thrush about the immigration policies. Now, I want to show you a little bit of the fight between Acosta and Miller, and I want to talk about a few points that were in those videos. So let's take a look at that now.
What you're proposing, or what the president's proposing here, does not sound like it's in keeping with American tradition when it comes to immigration. The Statue of Liberty says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. It doesn't say anything about speaking English or being able to be a computer programmer. Aren't you trying to change what it means to be an immigrant coming into this country? If you're telling them you have to speak English, can't people learn how to speak English when they get here?
Well, first of all, right now, it's a requirement that to be naturalized, you have to speak English. So the notion that speaking English wouldn't be a part of our immigration systems would be actually very ahistorical. Secondly, I don't want to get off into a whole thing about history here, but the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. It's a symbol of American liberty lighting the world. The poem that you're referring to that was added later is not actually part of the original Statue of Liberty, but more fundamentally, the history, but more fundamentally,
you're saying that
history,
that does not represent.
I'm saying that
what
I'm
the
saying that
country
the
has always
notion.
thought of
I'm
as
saying the notion that
immigration coming into this
I'm
country?
saying the notion.
Okay, so he talked about the poem, right? So that's what he mentioned, that, okay, the poem is ahistorical. Let's talk about history here. Now, he's actually correct about the poem. Now, the poem was added in 1883. Okay, so, oh, look, he's right on one piece. But the point is that right now, it is there. It was added, and it was there to be a symbol for immigrants. Now, I think a lot of us now look at that poem as a guiding principle for immigration, that America is a land of opportunity for people who are marginalized by their home countries, majorities in their home countries. For example, it kind of tracks to the original settlers to North America. Now, they fled from religious persecution. Can you think of another group that's fleeing from religious or political persecution? And of course, later on, those same settlers broke away from a king and founded a country, this country. Okay, so he's historically right on the poem, but I think he misses the point of the entire country. Now, I want to show you another video here, and then I want to go and rebut those points. So let's take a look at that.
In 1970, when we let in 300,000 people a year, was that violating or not violating the Statue of Liberty law of the land? In the 1990s, when it was 500,000 a year, was it violating or not violating the Statue of Liberty law of the land?
Was it violating?
When it was 700,000 a year. No, tell me what years. Tell me what years. Tell me what years meet Jim Acosta's definition of the Statue of Liberty poem law of the land. So you're saying 1 million a year is the Statue of Liberty number. 900,000 violates it, 800,000 violates it.
You're sort of bringing a
Jim.
press one for English philosophy here to
Jim.
immigration, and that's never
Jim.
been what the United States has been about, Steve.
But your statement's also shockingly ahistorical in another respect too, which is if you look at the history of immigration, it's actually ebbed and flowed.
Okay, so again, he's trying to make a point where, well, the immigration, it ebbs and flows and everything, and we've actually kept people out. Again, when you're looking at history, that's actually true. When it comes to America, and I hate to burst a bubble, but we've actually been incredibly exclusionary. That's not to excuse the policy. I think the policy is wrong, but we have to avoid whitewashing what we've actually done in history. I mean, and look, American history is full of us keeping out certain types of people. For example, the Chinese in the mid-1800s, right? You also had the Japanese in the early 1900s. They were denied citizenship. And then, of course, we had the Immigration Act of 1924, or otherwise known as the Johnson-Reed Act. Now, that specific act limited the number of immigrants who could be admitted from any country to 2% of the number of people from that country who were already living in the United States in 1890. And we have law after law over and over again that would restrict people from Southern and Eastern Europe, would restrict from Asian and East India. So look, when it comes down to it, that plaque, I don't think we've ever deserved that plaque. It's not that we shouldn't follow that. As Stephen Miller suggests, is that we've never really earned that plaque. We have been exclusionary and discriminatory for a long time. I don't think he's correct, but again, I don't think we've done anything to earn that plaque. So now people like Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, they're deeply, deeply wrong on principle. But let's not pretend that America has been this country that has welcomed everyone with open arms, and that under the Trump administration that this has suddenly changed. We have always been people that have tried to keep other people out for no reason other than their race. We've always had racist reactionary laws against certain groups of people, even refugees. For example, there was a group of Jewish refugees that were fleeing the Nazis. We turned them away, and they were certainly, they had to return to Europe, and they were killed. They almost certainly were killed under the Nazis. So we should not whitewash our own history. Instead, we should learn from it. Now, what lesson should we learn from this? Well, obviously that people like Miller are wrong when it comes to the negative effects of immigration. Now, later on in that interview, or on that press conference, he starts arguing with Glenn Thrush. Now, he makes the argument, and the crux of his argument is based on the idea that we need to make these immigration laws because they're hurting American workers. In fact, they're hurting low-skilled workers. This is what he said. He said, you've seen over time, as a result of this historic flow of unskilled immigration, a shift of wealth from the working class to wealthier corporations and businesses. And it's been very unfair for the American worker, but especially for immigrant workers, African-American workers, and Hispanic workers, and blue-collar workers in general across the country. So you see what he's using there. He's using sort of this populist working-class rhetoric to say, oh, look at what we're doing with this policy. We're actually hurting the working class. Now, some of the working class, let's be honest, they'll look at that and go, yeah, no, totally, yeah, that's what's happening to our jobs. Now, that's not factually correct, but people who are, rather busy working 2 jobs or not paying attention to politics, low information voters, they'll look at that and they'll be like, yeah, that must be why our wages are down. That must be why, I can't get good jobs anymore. We're going to blame the immigrant. So it goes down to Donald Trump's sort of strategy of pitting 2 sides against each other. Now, that's wrong, right? Now, and look, don't get me wrong, immigration does have an effect on the workforce, but it doesn't tell the whole story, okay? He doesn't tell the whole story. Like, a lot of people, though, think the immigrants have displaced them. It's been a common theme. The immigrants are coming, they're stealing our jobs. It's not true. Now, as I'm about to show you here, that whole rhetorical device that they're using, that rhetoric, is incorrect. So there's been some research into this, okay? There's a 2015 paper by a trio of researchers had found a link between more immigration and income inequality. However, that's a correlation, not causation. And immigration, it turns out that they found in this paper, is not a primary driver of income inequality. There's a graph that was created by those same researchers, makes it clear that the inequality, as measured with the Gini coefficient, would be nearly as high without the effects of immigration. The effect of immigrants, they say in the research, is, quote, modest. So look, unskilled foreign workers do have an impact on jobs and income inequality, of course. But the fact that we have such high income inequality is far more the fault of other factors than immigration. For example, you've got stagnating wages, loss of union power, terrible, trade deals, and anti-worker legislation like right to work. So, and look, think about the jobs that immigrants do. Well, some of them, actually a lot of them, come over and create small businesses. Or they also do jobs that immigrants can't. For example, there's a big demand for people who speak more than one language. This guy talks about, oh, English, right? You need to make English the primary language. Anybody who comes over here has to know English. Well, there's actually a really big demand for people who are bilingual. That's actually very helpful to corporations. Now, because, of course, a lot of companies do business internationally. So it helps. Now, there's also the fact that immigrants do a lot of jobs that Americans don't want to do. For example, working in seafood, tourism, landscaping, construction, even for Trump, okay? And nobody wants to work for Trump. And other seasonal industries, right? Those companies have seen a flood in need for H-2B visas, specifically seasonal workers, right? Since they don't have enough American workers. Now, I know what I'm saying might seem a little crazy, but there are companies with jobs that Americans actually refuse to do. Just like when it comes to the illegal immigration debate, you have the farmers have this need for undocumented labor that will work for lower wages. It's not because Americans, are getting those jobs stolen. It's because Americans won't do those jobs. There were people that were offering $15 an hour to go and pick vegetables, and they still couldn't get enough American workers after they kicked out the immigrants to go and pick those vegetables. So there are jobs that Americans apparently are not interested in doing, which is amazing to me. But of course, everybody's got their price. But how far do you have to raise wages? And I'm in favor of raising wages in order to get an American to do some of these jobs. For example, like seafood packing, right? Now, in Virginia, they have some experience with this. There's a lot of companies in Virginia that do, seafood packing, shucking of crabs and all that stuff, and packing them. They've been trying to find American workers, and they just can't. And so they say, well, we can't find American workers, so we need to bring in people from overseas with these H-2B visas that'll actually work for us. Well, they couldn't find them. In fact, they couldn't find them in time. And since they couldn't find them, they're saying that lack of workers has led to at least one company shutting down an assembly line over the summer. So, wait. So if they could find workers, they wouldn't have to shut it down, right? So, yes, not only did shutting down that line, by the way, hurt the processing plant, but it also involved hurting workers that would do the hauling, packaging, and refrigerating of the seafood. So there's some issues here, okay? Now, for me personally, I think we should raise the wages, right? Instead of import workers, raise the wages to a point of where Americans will actually take those jobs. But until they do, they're relying on guest workers. Now, the problem is that a lot of people will look at that and they'll blame the guest workers instead of the companies for keeping those wages low. And if we did raise the wages, look, let's be honest, we will probably see a price increase of some of those goods. I don't mind that. I don't actually mind paying a few cents or even a couple bucks more if it means that somebody, an American, actually gets a good job at a good wage. I'm fine with that. But of course, not everybody's going to agree. But one thing that we shouldn't do is blame the workers that are willing to come in and do those jobs that nobody else, that Americans don't seem to want to be interested in doing. So now let's get to some more data that he references. And that is a recent study by George Borges. Now, Borges looked at the migration of more than 100,000 Cubans into Florida in 1980. He found that wages among the least educated workers in Miami dropped to 10 to 30% as a result of the influx. But wait, Borges' study was a direct rebuttal to a 1990 study by David Card, which found that there was virtually no effect of on wages or unemployment rates, even among the Cuban immigrant community that was already in the area. Borges' study itself was soon rebutted, as the National Review noted, which is not a liberal publication, by the way, with researchers pointing out that he didn't account for other demographic shifts in the area that may have had significant effect on wages. So again, he didn't look at all the data. Borges didn't, and look, they found that it had very little effect on employment and wages. Another study said that as much as $300 billion a year may be lost as a result of our current immigration system in terms of people drawing more public benefits than they're paying in. However, that is also misleading, especially since new immigrants can't actually draw unemployment benefits for 5 years. So that $300 billion, well, that is at the very high end. Now, estimates actually start at $43 billion in spending, and also adds that by the second generation, immigrant families are actually putting in an extra $30 billion a year into the social safety net system. So if you look at their arguments there, that, oh my God, immigrants hurt jobs and they're, you know, that they hurt wages and they create income inequality, it kind of falls apart. That data doesn't back it up as far as having an impact on jobs and on economic inequality. So at most, immigration actually has a moderate effect on all of those. And on public spending, it's not nearly as drastic as the Stephen Millers and the Ann Coulters and the right wing want you to believe. And I think that's important. So I think policy-wise, I think it's fair to talk about H-1B and H-2B visas. That's fine. I mean, H-1Bs, for example, is where wealthy companies, well, they will look for overseas skilled labor. And they'll claim, oh my God, we just can't have these, we can't find these American workers that are highly skilled in computers in Silicon Valley. No, there are actually some very skilled workers. In fact, we have stories of people that are training their replacements that come from overseas. So I don't necessarily buy that argument. I think H-1Bs get abused, and also H-2Bs get abused. Trump is a perfect example of that. His company brought in 15,000 workers under the H-2B program. Why didn't you hire American? Oh, that's right. I think some Americans probably wouldn't want to work for Trump, but others would. So, look, it's fine to look at those policies, but what's not fine is to do what the Trump administration is currently doing. That's to blame and then ban immigrants from coming in simply because they're poor. They want to have their golden tickets, okay? What they want to do is they want to bring in rich people. Trump loves rich people, doesn't care where they're from. He loves the rich Saudis because they go and buy his apartments. But what he doesn't like is poor people. Again, it doesn't matter where they're from when it comes to him, but if you're poor and foreign, you are doubly fucked under the Trump administration. And it is not fair to ban those people simply for being poor. You never know who's going to be the next I can't think of his name now, founder of Apple. I'm blanking out today, but you know who I'm talking about, Steve Jobs. You never know who's going to be the next Steve Jobs. Or Steve Jobs' dad, who actually did come from Syria. So, look, I think it's a mistake. You're essentially blaming people for just trying to come in and trying to work and actually make a living. You're blaming them for the effects of actual corporate greed. And Miller and some of the Trump guys, well, they know they can get away with doing so in order to advance their own racist interests. So, and of course, the interests of the corporations themselves. Hey, everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.